The message to any incoming criminal was clear as day. Nobody escapes from the landlocked prison fortress that is Alcatraz. 36 men ignored this warning and tried their luck anyway, succumbing to immediate capture or drowning in the frigid waters of the San Francisco Bay. All men, except for 3. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers carried out the most cunning prison break in history, sending the FBI into a tailspin. For decades, their story remained a mystery. Some 50 years later, FBI officials have received a letter that finally unveils the truth. What does it say? How did they escape? And what was Alcatraz really like? Let's find out. Before we dive into the miraculous escape, it's important to understand what made Alcatraz so significant in the first place. How did it come to boast such a forbidding reputation? In 1850, President Millard Fillmore declared that the infamous Alcatraz Island was to be used by the American military. A fortress was built, and more than 100 cannons were installed. Then by the late 1850s, the U.S. Army had begun holding its first military prisoners at Alcatraz. For decades, Confederate sympathizers and people accused of treason were shoved onto the isolated island. Overcrowding soon became an issue in the early 1900s, so the inmates were ordered to construct a new 600-cell jailhouse, which at its completion in 1912 was the world's largest reinforced concrete building. In 1933, the Army relinquished Alcatraz to the U.S. Justice Department, and from there the most notorious federal prison in American history was born, housing some of America's most difficult and dangerous felons until its eventual closing in 1963. Infamous gangster Al Capone was among the first prisoners to set foot inside in August of 1934. The island's impenetrable security and mind-numbing routine destroyed him, shifting him from a seasoned troublemaker into a cooperative member of the Alcatraz prison band. Robert Stroud, the so-called Birdman of Alcatraz, plus George Machine Gun Kelly and the first Public Enemy #1, Alvin Karpis, all headlined the long list of celebrated criminals to call Alcatraz home. But Alcatraz wasn't a place for the most violent criminals in America. The island was intended to house the convicts most in need of an attitude adjustment, convicts prone to continuous violence in their cells, and criminals whose escape attempts were relentless. To put more troublemakers in their place, the security in Alcatraz was unmatched. In its heyday, it was the ultimate maximum security prison. Metal detectors were introduced in 1934. Reinforced steel bars were added into the cells, costing more than $200,000, which was more than the entire prison's initial build cost. Remote-controlled tear gas canisters and gun galleries dotted the walls, while armed guards patrolled the corridors 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. None of the cell blocks had direct access to the outer walls of the prison. In essence, each cell block was like a prison inside a prison, and the island's one-man-per-cell policy meant that interaction was almost non-existent. This place was a hell on earth. And of course, due to its isolated position in the middle of the chilly San Francisco Bay, there was no chance of swimming to freedom, especially not with sharks rumored to be circling. All things considered, escape was deemed impossible. But that didn't stop inmates from trying. During its time as a federal penitentiary, a total of 14 escape attempts comprising 36 different prisoners was recorded. From the first in 1936 to the last in 1962, nearly all of them failed miserably. However, on the morning of June 12, 1962, a loud, shrill siren began wailing from atop the rock. That siren indicated that the only successful escape in the prison's history had just gone down during the night. Under the moonlight, late on June 11th, 3 men executed an escape plan which had been 6 months in the making. Their names were Frank Morris and brothers John and Clarence Anglin. Who were these men? What set them apart from the horde of the other attempted escapees? The answer to that question lies with the group's mastermind, Frank Morris, a career criminal who'd been breaking the law since he was 13. With a tested IQ of 133, Frank was a borderline genius, and escaping prisons was no new feat for him. While serving 10 years for bank robbery at the Louisiana State Penitentiary, Frank managed to slip out from under the guards' noses and escape, including stints behind bars in Alabama and Georgia thereafter. Frank had spent a lifetime navigating the prison system before landing in Alcatraz as prisoner number AZ-1441 in 1960. John and Clarence arrived shortly after, in 1960 and 61 respectively. If Morris was the brains, then the Anglin boys were the brawn. Frank Morris didn't pick out just any old prisoners from the crowd. He had a history with the Anglin brothers. They shared adjacent cells back in the Atlanta, Georgia prison, and had developed a sense of trust among one another. While these 3 men have forever attracted the Alcatraz spotlight, there was indeed a 4th member of the escape crew, Alan West. West never made it out of the prison, unable to sneak out of his cell fast enough, but he was heavily involved in the planning and preparation. Let's talk about this planning then. How do a group of hardened criminals sneak out of a supposedly inescapable fortress? The quartet had begun laying plans for the escape 6 months before D-Day in December of 1961, when Allen West allegedly found some discarded saw blades in one of the utility corridors while cleaning. Using those saw blades as well as metal spoons stolen from the dining area, the inmates chipped away at the cement around the ventilation grills in each cell until they were large enough to squeeze through. The Anglins inhabited adjacent cells, as did West and Morris, which allowed for the inmates to take alternating shifts, with one working and the other one on lookout. They'd start at 5:30 p.m. and continue till about 9 p.m., just prior to the lights out count. To avoid being spotted, the holes were covered with papier-mâché ventilation grills made from magazines from the prison library. And in order to mute the noise, Frank Morris would play his accordion. Behind the cells was an empty, unguarded utility corridor. This became the makeshift workshop for the inmates, storing over 50 raincoats that had been acquired, some donated and some stolen, which they carefully stitched into a 6-by-14-foot raft. Then there was just one more piece to the puzzle. How could they ensure that the roaming guards didn't notice their absence? The answer? Dummies. The team fashioned together crude but lifelike heads, constructed from a homemade cement powder mixture of soap and toilet paper, and then decorated them with paint taken from the prison art kits. And for the final touch of authenticity, human hair from the barber shop. When the cold, dark, fateful night of June 11th rolled around, it was time to make a break for it. The dummies were placed on the prisoners' pillows. They squeezed through the holes one last time, slid down a kitchen vent pipe, and then climbed 2 successive 12-foot barbed wire fences. By 10 p.m. that evening, they had vanished into the thick San Francisco Bay fog, never to be seen again. Well, or so we thought. The FBI and local authorities spent 17 years working on the case, investing hundreds of thousands of dollars and seemingly endless hours. They found the remains of the raincoat raft on Angel Island shortly after the escape, as well as a small plastic bag containing the Anglins' personal items, but no signs of evidence thereafter. Despite years of investigation, no credible evidence emerged to suggest that the men were still alive, either in the U.S. or overseas. So, on December 31st of 1979, the FBI officially closed the case and presumed the trio had drowned. However, one letter received in January of 2013 rewrites the entire story. Perhaps the trio really did make it out alive. "My name is John Anglin," it read. "I escaped from Alcatraz in June of 1962 with my brother Clarence and Frank Morris. I'm 83 years old and in bad shape. I have cancer. And yes, we all made it out that night, but barely." He even said, "I will write back to let you know exactly where I am." This is no joke. In return, he asked for the cooperation of the FBI. He wanted a 1-year prison sentence, during which he could get treatment for his illness, and a widespread TV announcement of the deal to avoid any last-minute screw-over. John's letter also claimed that he was the last living escapee, suggesting that Clarence died in 2005 and Frank in 2008. When this piece of evidence came to light, interest immediately reignited. However, it begged the question, was it legitimate? Could it be trusted? In 2013, at the time of the writing, John Anglin would have been 83 years old, so yes, it was plausible. The FBI ran a DNA test on the letter, yet they found nothing conclusive. They couldn't prove that it was John behind the pen, but they couldn't prove that it wasn't him either. According to the recounts of Allen West, the quartet had intended to cross to the mainland from Angel Island, steal clothes to replace their prison uniforms, and jack a car to make their getaway. While the authorities didn't find proof, if this letter were to be true, then that plan was executed perfectly. As the decades since the infamous escape have passed, we've come to understand that Alcatraz's fortress-like, inescapable reputation was somewhat inflated. Just months after Morris and the Anglin brothers snuck out, another prisoner named John Paul Scott managed to swim to Fort Point, below the Golden Gate Bridge. While he was found, caught, treated for hypothermia, and sent back to the prison, he did make it to the mainland, showing that the swim wasn't as impossible as it was made out to be. These days, hundreds of athletes participate in the Escape from Alcatraz triathlon every year, further proving that it is possible to swim from the island and survive. Not only does the letter finally shed light on the escape, but it adds credibility to other pieces of evidence that have piled up over the years. Family members of the Anglin brothers have been receiving nameless postcards for decades, and their grandmother had reportedly received anonymous roses for several years after the escape, which the family firmly believes came from John or Clarence, who were most likely living in Brazil for a considerable amount of time. A 2015 History Channel special showed this alleged photograph of the brothers taken in Brazil in the mid-1970s, some 13 years after their disappearance. Facial recognition software confirms suspicion. Even before this photograph was taken, rumors of Clarence Anglin living in Brazil were so prevalent, in fact, that the FBI actually sent a search team down there to try and find him. How would they have made it all the way to Brazil? Odds are with counterfeit black market passports. for which the average price is around $1,500. How would they have got the money for something like this? Count on Frank Morris to have coordinated with outside sources. Remember, this guy was a certified genius. So the Anglins were allegedly in Brazil. Meanwhile, in 1968, someone claiming to be a former classmate of Frank Morris approached the police and told them that they'd bumped into Frank Morris in Maryland, who now sported a beard and a mustache. By 1989, it appeared that they had all relocated. 3 separate tips were phoned in by Florida residents claiming and identifying the trio to be hiding out on nearby farms. The reliability of the account is questionable. The tipsters could have been pranksters or conspiracy theorists seeing what they wanted to see, or they could have been right all along. Perhaps there really is more to the story. In the decades following the escape, the FBI claimed that no evidence was found. They claimed that there was no proof of a raft making it across the bay, nor any subsequent carjackings. However, it was later revealed that a raft and a paddle were found off Angel Island. And a report of 3 men stealing a 1955 blue Chevrolet was filled out not long after the escape. Does this represent a connection of the dots? Is the letter claiming to be John Anglin all the proof we need to put this mystery to bed? Not according to the FBI. But we'll let you make up your own mind about this great escape.